Welcome to another episode of BYU's Tech Transfer Podcast. This is Dave Brown, and today I'm interviewing Katie Hunter. If you're starting a new business, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to validate the opportunity you're looking at, and Katie is an expert on doing that. So, Katie, will you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hi. Like Dave said, I'm Katie. I have worked here since the beginning of fall semester, and I love the validation process. I am a business major, and yeah, I love it, and I'm super excited to talk about how to decide whether technology is viable. So that'll be great.
Yeah, and Katie is doing a really great job for us as an employee here in Tech Transfer. Let me ask you just as an initial question, long term, Katie, do you plan to do a startup of your own, or
Mm-hmm.
what are your ambitions?
Yeah, I'm really hoping to make my own business. I'm going to participate in the hackathon, the sandbox program for BYU,
Okay.
in January. So that'll be super exciting. But yeah, I feel like I've gained a bunch of really important skills that will like help me determine whether my startup will be successful. So
Okay.
it's awesome.
Great. And I don't know a lot about the hackathon. I assume you're creating a software product really quickly.
Yeah, a tech product. I'm actually starting it now, probably. I'll start
Okay.
it the next couple of days. But yeah, I'm going to be a product manager and I'll get together a team and then I'll present it. And then once I'm in the program, I'll spend my time like creating a new business. So
Okay.
yeah,
Well, this is one more great opportunity for BYU students. Really a help for student entrepreneurs here.
yeah,
And
for
that's through
sure.
the Rollins Center, probably, right?
I
Okay.
think so.
Well, great. So today we're talking about validation. And please tell us what you do to validate
hmm
technologies here, just kind of a day-to-day thing,
Yeah.
but also what is validation in case someone doesn't know.
Yeah. So just to start out, validation is determining whether your idea is good. Basically, it's a lot of like talking to people, it's a lot of determining if there's a problem. So, my day to day, mostly what I like to do is just trying to talk to as many as like people as possible. I also do a lot of research. So, it's kind of like it's both for sure. I meet with a team, another intern, and we talk about like what we found, and it's super fun. So yeah, from day to day, I will spend time on video calls, like talking to the professor who created the technology, or I'll be talking to specific customers,
Mhm.
or I will be like researching the market. So
Okay.
that's kind of my job.
Great. So if you're looking at that in sequence, say you're an entrepreneur and you have your idea and you're trying to validate one
hmm
idea, what's the first step? Where do you start?
Honestly, like you have an idea, I would say you first should Google it, check if there's something that's the same thing, because a lot of times there is a lot of specifics. Just because there's competition doesn't mean to like just give up. But if there's a patent on your idea, like then it's like, okay, there's a barrier, like don't do it, you know what I
That's gonna be a
mean?
problem.
So I just think doing some super like basic initial research once you have your idea is the first step. And then I would start determining like, is this an actual problem people have? Because like the best technologies solve something for people. So like talking to your demographic and saying like, is this like something you would want is like the perfect way to understand if it will be successful.
Okay. And when you're assessing the market need, you're
hmm
speaking to end users. How do you know who the end user for a product is going to be?
hmm
And then if you know who they are, how do you get in contact with them?
That's a great question. That is one of the hardest parts, I think, of the validation process. So the first thing I always do is just try to determine like my target demographic. Like who do I need to talk to? Who are my customers? And a lot of times that'll change. Like I'll decide on someone, it'll change. But like one case I worked on, it was a lot of educators, so teachers and stuff. So a lot of it is through email, a lot of it is through LinkedIn. Probably the most successful way I get in contact with people is like, let's say I'm interviewing the professor who created the technology. At the end, I'll say, hey, is there anyone like you can put me in contact with who would be interested in this? And just doing that with everybody I interview, it generally works the best, I would say.
Okay. So, and you've got me thinking, maybe say I invent educational technology.
hmm
I would like to think, well, this is for teachers because there are teachers
hmm
associations and
Yeah,
unions and people, they would be easy to get in contact with.
yeah,
But the reality is that maybe my customer will be someone else.
yes,
Like, how
that's
do you
so
deal with
true.
that issue?
Yeah, I just try to talk to as many people as possible. So for that technology, I went to tutoring companies because that's like a completely different um, market, but it still like could work.
Hmm.
I go to teachers. I also try to get in contact with not like teachers who will be using it, but with people within the university who would look at like buying it.
Hmm.
So like just trying to like talk with them and say like, hey, like we're trying to develop this. Like, what are your thoughts? One person from BYU Idaho, he was like the head of I don't even remember like education software or something so
Okay.
specific, and we talked to him and it was really awesome.
Hmm.
But yeah, I honestly think you just kind of have to start, and once you start talking to people, you kind of gain more insight into like the specifics.
Okay.
Hmm.
And maybe would you mind walking us through a specific example? Can you think of a technology that's okay to talk about that's been
Hmm.
properly patented and
Yeah,
you go with?
yeah. Let me think. Um, yeah, I worked on a prosthetic venous valve case,
Mhm.
and I went through the validation process for this, and I actually used it for a case competition as well. But it was super interesting. So the
So
I
this is like a valve that you would transplant in someone's vein, like in their leg or something,
Yeah,
right?
so
Okay.
it's like varicose veins, and basically it solves. It's kind of complicated. I won't go into like the details of the medical
Hmm.
field, but it's a prosthetic, and there's so many of these out there. Like there's so many prosthetic venous valve veins, like you would have no idea.
Well,
So what I did to start the validation process is first we like researched it and stuff, we understood the market, etc. And then I actually got in contact with a vascular surgeon, and I called him and I like talked to him for 30 minutes, and I was like, "Look, like what are your thoughts? Like what do you think of this?" And he basically said, um, the biggest issue we came across was like prosthetic valves, like people just don't trust them. And he gave us like a bunch of insights as to like why like he would never use it. And this was like
hmm.
great validation in the opposite like
Sure.
side,
Yeah.
because obviously like I like inherently am like, oh, I want it to work. I want people to like want this, but at the
Right.
end of the day it's more important to be like, okay, like this isn't going to work, and like don't spend like 5 years developing it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So that specific case, we talked to a vascular surgeon, we talked to manufacturers actually just to get like a quote of how much it would cost,
Hmm.
and we like determined it wouldn't be good enough to take to market, in the
Yeah.
sense that products have a huge market, but if like sometimes it's not worth it.
Hmm.
So,
Okay, well, a couple of questions about that. One
yeah.
is, so you talk to the surgeon,
Mhm.
and if I'm talking to a surgeon, I'm assuming this is a really smart person,
Yes.
probably, but it's not a business person, right?
No.
And
No.
so this could be random surgeon who has an axe to grind against the valve companies. You know what I mean?
That's
How
a
do you
really
know it's
good
not an
point.
outlier?
That's a great point. Um What I generally do when talking to people is I just try to determine the pain. And one thing in the business school they say a lot is this like a mosquito bite or is it a shark bite?
Hmm.
Right? So I totally understand what you're saying, and that's why it's so important to talk to so many people, because it could
Yeah.
just be like one person. So yeah, we talked to a bunch of different people and it was super interesting. And then we got in contact with like Corbin Church, who works in the business
Hmm.
school and different things, and we were trying to understand like the business side of it as well as the medical side of it. And with a complex product like that, it's so hard because finding like those people to talk to, it's so difficult. Like I couldn't just go to like a Costco parking lot and like talk to people. Like I had to like really do my research.
And I
Um,
should mention for anyone listening who doesn't know, so Corbin is an adjunct professor here and a
mhm.
serial entrepreneur. He knows, like, he would be good at spotting a good technology.
Yes,
Yeah.
he's really smart, and he's awesome. So,
Okay. Okay. Well, great. And then so sometimes you're going to do a process like that, and
hmm
validation is not going to go the way you wanted it to.
hmm
Have there been any positive surprises, like the other direction, where you had a
hmm
technology where you're like, oh, man, I don't know, and then it turns out people really want it?
yeah, actually, I think generally from the very beginning we can determine if people want it. Like, I think it's
Hmm.
relatively obvious within like the first 2 hours of working on a case if it'll be positive.
Hmm.
One case I'm working on right now, which I won't go into the
Oh, and
specifics
can I
of.
interrupt and say
Oh
that?
yeah,
So I think what you're saying is the question is the magnitude of how positive is the big problem or low problem,
yes,
right?
yes, yes, for
Okay.
sure. One case I'm working on right now is going super well, in the sense that everyone I've talked to, even people it's a medical case, but even people who aren't like doctors, I'll like talk about it too, and they'll be like, "Oh my gosh, that would be so amazing! Like,
Oh, yeah.
we would love that. Like, I would totally use that." So it's just kind of, it's definitely interesting because at the beginning of the education software case, I was like, "Oh, like maybe this could work." But then once I started talking to people, I was like, "Oh, maybe not." Same with like the prosthetic case, but
Mhm.
yeah, I just think, yeah, I don't really
Well,
know.
so if I'm calling someone from if I called up and said, "Look, this is tech transfer at BYU. We have
Hmm.
this technology. I have some questions."
Yeah.
I would expect most people to talk to me. Like a surgeon,
Yes,
if
yes,
they're not too
yes.
busy, they'll probably talk to me.
Yeah.
But student entrepreneurs might be a little nervous. What's
Hmm.
been your experience? You're calling up saying, "Look, I'm a BYU student here."
Hmm.
How willing are people to talk to you?
Yeah. Cold calling is at first was so scary for me. I was like, I'm just randomly calling like these businesses, but now it's super cool because almost everyone, when you say you're a student, they like want to help you. Like they're like, "Oh my gosh, there's this student
Yeah.
who wants to know more about what I'm doing." Like they like find joy in that, and they find joy in helping people, especially in Utah. So a lot of people have been so willing to help, and they're super like they go out of their way to like connect me with other people, and it's been
Hmm.
so awesome.
That's
So
that's totally
yeah.
been yeah, that's totally been our experience with students and student employees,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's like everyone just wants to help you.
Yeah.
So it's awesome.
And you think part of that also is what we're doing here. When you're trying to take a technology to market, you're trying to solve problems for people.
Hmm.
Especially, I would think talking to doctors, like they have to,
Hmm.
like on an ideological, like a belief level, they support that, right?
Yes, yes. Especially like doctors are so busy, but they're also like so interested in like technology, surprisingly, in like my um experience. They've always been like super interested on hearing what's being developed and like getting insights.
Hmm.
And it's cool because since we're working on disclosures that are being developed, we're like almost giving them an insight of like into a product that could be developed.
Right.
And I think they find that super interesting.
Yeah, maybe a little glimpse of the future for them.
Hmm.
So if you're an entrepreneur and you have some idea, you want to
Hmm.
validate, this is all a helpful process, but I know there are going to be some bumps in the road. What are
Hmm.
big challenges you face in validating a technology?
Ooh, good question. Um, like we were saying, everyone is so nice in Utah, and
Hmm.
sometimes when you talk to them, they are super nice, overly so, where it kind of
Okay.
skews the like the validation process in the sense it's like, do you actually like this, or like are you just being like really
Yeah.
kind? So the way I usually handle that is like I just am like, listen, like I usually say something along the lines of like I really need like blatant honesty in this case because that's going to be the most helpful thing for me. Or like surveys are super useful because nobody's going to like lie on a survey generally.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, a lot of people's tendency, I think, would be to ask their roommates, family members, spouse,
mhm,
whatever, "Hey, what do you think of my
yes,
idea?"
yes.
And that's a
They're
little bit rough,
blinded by
right?
love.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. They're gonna try to be nice to you. So,
Exactly, exactly.
okay, what do you think? So, I don't personally do a lot of the validation work. Maybe in a
Hmm.
general way, I do. But
Hmm.
sometimes when I want an objective view these days, I'll use ChatGPT. Like
Oh,
I'll tell it
interesting.
something very very subjective and ask it make some objective observations about this.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's good at validation or not, but
I haven't really used ChatGPT. I usually just use like statistics. Like I just determine, like I just look up a bunch of facts about the product and just try to get like a logical view of like, will this be efficient according, like, is there enough customers? Is there like,
mhm.
is a competitor like doing well? Because if like a similar product isn't like doing well, then that tells you a lot like in the validation process. So I haven't used ChatGPT, but maybe I should.
Just
I don't
well, I don't
know.
know if it would work with this. It scores high on objectivity,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
okay. So help me out with that. You're saying you'll look for statistics, which makes sense because the numbers
Yes.
are going to be objective. They're going to
Yes,
measure something.
yes.
It's just a question of whether it's meaningful. So say I invent something new or have an idea. It's
Hmm.
a toothbrush, bristles on both sides. It's what we've all been waiting for.
Oh,
The
yes.
what statistics do I want? Where would I look for that?
Ooh, for a
An
bristles on both.
improved
Okay,
toothbrush.
okay. I would first look at how many toothbrushes are being used, like how like the statistics of how many are being bought, what the prices are, what the margins are to determine like how valuable it is, how much money they're making. I
So total
would,
addressable market,
yeah,
probably.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would determine like how much competition you have, which would be a lot in the
Yeah.
toothbrush area.
A
So
few big players. Yep.
yeah, that would be super interesting. A lot of times I mentioned this a little bit ago, but I do look at competition not in the sense to like sway me from an idea, but they've done so much already for you. Like if it's a similar
Hmm.
product, it's like, oh, they've already done so much of the marketing and they've already like figured out like a bunch of stuff for you. So it's super nice to like look at a competitor with a similar product and be like, okay, like this is like how much they're making. If it's like a public
Yeah.
company, you can dive into like their financial statements. Anyways, that's kind of
Yeah. And sometimes, I
plan.
don't know if this is core to validation or not, but
Hmm.
sometimes people will look for kind of a metaphor. Like they'll say, um, I'm Uber except for toothbrushes or whatever it is. Like they'll,
Hmm.
they'll make some, and that'd be a terrible business. They'll make some analogy like that.
Yeah.
But do you ever do that? Do you ever look at a similar business in a different market and say, okay, these are the steps they went through. This is why this makes sense?
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Like one super interesting case that I mentioned earlier, the prosthetic venous valve case, we like were creating a plan for it and everything, and we looked at the entire like steps they did to get this to market.
Hmm.
And one of the things they did was they did all of their testing in Colombia because it's so much faster. So
Okay.
we were like, okay, that can be like really good for our product. So just like learning from like the mistakes of other companies and learning from the successes, I think is super useful.
Hmm.
I think the biggest problem entrepreneurs face is almost most entrepreneurs are very passionate, like
Right.
just naturally, and I think that's awesome, but a lot of times it blinds them to the fact that their product isn't being validated. So
Hmm.
a lot of them go into the validation process looking for it to be validated, which is not ideal, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think it's just super important to be super like objective and like if like what I would do is I would take like five of my best ideas and I'd try to validate all of them and then just look at the numbers like okay, how many people liked this idea? And just
Yeah.
determine it that way because a lot of times like we just want something to work so badly that we'll like make it work when sometimes it's
Right.
just not a good idea. So,
So yeah, so inventors can be like that. And then I've been like that in tech transfer before. This past summer, there was a software technology that I've worked on for a few years to try to
mhm,
commercialize. And it
yeah,
just made intuitive sense to me that people would want this.
yeah, yeah,
And so our validation team sent out a survey to some industry association,
yeah,
and people responded. The question was on a scale of 1 to 10, how badly do you want this?
yeah.
It was mostly twos. Like
Okay.
people felt like, it could be okay, but I would never pay for it.
Right, right.
And so it turned out I put a lot of effort into it because it made sense,
Hmm.
but actually for the end user, no, they just
Yeah.
didn't want it.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. But that's great validation
Yeah,
in
it
the
was
negative
helpful,
sense. Yeah.
super helpful. So you're working with inventors or researchers. The technologies can kind of be their baby at some level.
Hmm.
How do you work with them? You need to be objective,
Yes.
but you also need to work with them. How do you do that?
Yeah. So just being, well, first, just being super kind and like always being like, this is a super interesting product. Like, that's probably the most important thing. Because if I go in there and I'm like, nobody likes this, they'll be
Yeah,
like, okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So most of them are kind of like that. It's like their baby. But generally, the role of the inventor for me is just for me to totally understand what I'm looking at. Like, just
Mhm.
understand everything about the disclosure, why they made it, like their reasons for it, just, yeah, the basic understanding of what it was used for, and then asking them in some way to connect me with someone else. So
Mhm.
that's like what I think the professor's roles are in my validation process.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It seems like so I've been working in tech transfer like 12 or 13 years.
Hmm.
It seems like just in that like relatively short period of time, the professors generally in my industry, so education in the United States,
Hmm.
have become a little more willing to take feedback from industry.
Hmm.
So I think in many cases, probably technologies you get were initially at least informed by industry. They probably listened to companies or someone who said, "Here's a problem," and then they set out to address that problem. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I do think that's fair. A lot of professors are like that. A lot of the ones I've worked with are surprisingly pessimistic about the business world,
Oh, really?
which is really funny.
That's fair.
Because they're just so brilliant and smart, and they have like their thing that they just want to work on, which is awesome. But
Hmm.
they're like, we'll leave it to you guys. Like, you guys figure out everything else, which is awesome, and I love it. But yeah, so it's kind of a, I don't know, it can go both ways for sure. Some of them totally are like super into the industry and are like, yes, like this is the problem. Like this is how we're going to solve it. Specifically with older disclosures, I've noticed that that's a lot
Hmm.
less. So yeah.
Okay,
Hmm.
that makes sense. And so the professors you deal with in tech transfer are they're world class in their field, and typically,
Yes.
tell me if you agree with this. Like my experience has been typically professors are going to take on problems that are difficult. They want to
Hmm.
do things that are cutting edge from an academic sense.
Yes.
And so the challenge is matching that to the market. Often it's a good match,
Hmm.
but sometimes it's not a good match, or
Hmm.
sometimes it's just too early. They might be
Hmm.
way ahead of the market. So could you find something not valid right now? There's not enough demand, but maybe a decade from now there will be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's super interesting how their brains work. It's so funny.
Mm,
But a lot of cases they'll start like that, like they will take on a huge problem.
yeah.
Just like something super big, and they'll
Hmm.
just want to solve like every single part of it because they are experts and that's like the way
Hmm.
their brain works. And then once they realize like there's issues, like we'll have the patent and it'll be like a proof of concept is what they call it. Like this is a
Yeah.
proof of concept, but they don't like ever touch it again.
Right.
So that's kind of one of the issues I've found is like professors who like start these like awesome technologies and then
Hmm.
like halfway through they're like, "Oh, never mind," basically.
Well,
Yeah.
I think what that is just a symptom of how academic research goes. You
Mhm.
get a grant to do research on a project, and you might want to spend the rest of your life researching that, but you can't because
For
you got to
sure,
move on
for
to the
sure.
next grant
Yeah, yeah.
and so on. So
Yeah.
that's for various reasons. I think that's less a problem at BYU than other places, but
Oh
there's
yeah,
definitely that dynamic.
BYU is super good at following through with their technologies. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
super interesting.
And if you're explaining to an entrepreneur,
Hmm.
like in terms of market potential, what are the key indicators? What would you tell
Mm,
them? Like
the
what
key
tells you, oh,
indicators. Yeah,
this is likely a good market?
the more people who need something, the better.
Hmm.
So the medical industry is just huge. Like every product I work on that's medical,
Hmm.
it like always blows my mind. I'm always like, oh my gosh, there's so many customers because so many people
Hmm.
need it.
And in tech transfer, I should say, the big commercial outliers are almost all medical.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah. So I would say just finding a product that works for so many people. Like anything, like I said, the medical industry, anything in the pet industry, like so many people love their
yeah.
pets. So that's huge. Yeah, so I think if you're like making a product, ask yourself like, will a lot of people want this? Or is it like so few people that want it where like you'll have to reach them? Because you don't like once you create something, if it's like an amazing product that like so many people want, they'll come to you for it.
Hmm.
But if like you choose like the smallest target demographic possible, like you're gonna have to push it to them. And that's
Right.
definitely like something to consider.
Yeah, it's just going to be harder to find the people who
Mm-hmm.
love your product.
For sure.
Okay. And so when you're working on validation, you're doing a lot of market research. Are there any tools you use to stay up to speed on market trends? I know at the university we probably have proprietary database access to
Yeah.
subscription databases, but for the average person trying to stay abreast of trends, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I would honestly just say making sure all the sources you're looking at when you look stuff up is recent. Because,
Hmm.
like, I will have found something that's like 10 years ago, and I'm like, oh, this is the perfect source, but it's 10 years ago, so it's not the
Yeah.
perfect source. So I would say, like, when you're researching things, like, just keep in mind what you're looking at, because you can find so much information on the internet. It's amazing. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I would say just making sure it's really recent, up to date, and, like, credible.
Okay, so the
Hmm.
consumer market is a little bit like the stock market where it's changing and you
Hmm.
got to stay up to speed.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Okay, so in tech transfer, we focus a lot on intellectual property.
Hmm.
How does that play into your process? What some technologies will maybe have, when you're looking at them, they might have an issued patent already.
Yes,
Some will
yes.
be software, maybe with relatively thin IP protection.
Hmm.
How does that play in?
Oh, that is, I think it's a huge factor when considering different ways we can take a technology. Like one of the cases I worked on, the patent was not issued, it was pending. And that was like something to consider, especially because I found in a similar patent that they had something like super similar to what they were
Okay.
saying. So I was like,
Hmm.
okay, this is like on uneven ground kind of thing. But patents are so awesome because like imagine the chaos if like intellectual property wasn't a thing. Like it gives
Yeah.
inventors such like a great opportunity to just like work on their product for a period of time and it's super awesome. But yeah, once you get like a patent that's like issued, I think it really increases the viability of your product.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, so it's a legal monopoly you can get. Most
Mhm.
monopolies are illegal in business. If you have a patent, you have a monopoly. So when you're looking at validity of a technology, I think one thing you're looking at is will we have a barrier to entry? Because
Mhm.
you could have a technology that's great, there's huge demand, but as soon as we create it, any company that wants to will steal it from us. Not
Yes,
so good.
yes. That's so true. And I don't know, a lot of companies, like if you're trying to sell a product, they won't pay attention to you until you have a patent. Like that's really important, I think.
Right. And for a startup company, I've heard different rules of thumb over time. Some VCs or entrepreneurs will say every patent that a startup has is worth $1 million or $2 million of
Mhm.
valuation or something.
Yeah.
It definitely does make a difference for people.
Yeah, for sure.
And not all patents are created equally, but people do care about that.
Mhm.
Okay, so looking forward, do you see any ways the validation could be improved? Around here in tech transfer, we're trying to innovate, trying to do things
Mhm.
better. If we wanted to improve our validation process, what would you suggest?
That's a great question. I think even from now to like compared to when I started the validation process, it's evolved for me. Just like as I've learned different tactics of like talking to people and reaching people. Um, yeah, I think the most helpful thing has been talking to Jason, my boss. He's super helpful with the validation process. So in a general
And we talked to him in
sense,
episode 3 of the podcast.
oh
If anyone
really?
wants to
Oh,
check it out,
that's
so okay,
that's so funny.
yeah.
I think sharing information, like in the sense that he can pass along like what he learned to me.
Hmm.
And then I talked to like Alexis, who's like another intern, like yesterday, and I'm just like she was asking me a bunch of questions and I can just like share what I learned. So I
Hmm.
think just consistently staying up to date, like in the sense that we should be like consistently talking to each other and just
Hmm.
saying like, okay, like that's awesome, but like maybe reach them in this way because I
Hmm.
think the best way the validation process is evolving is through learning
Hmm.
because every time I do like a new disclosure, I totally learn like a lot more. So,
Yeah, and you guys are doing great. Alexis is doing great, and Jason's
hmm
very enthusiastic. You're very enthusiastic.
yeah.
So, what do you love about validation, or why is
hmm
this a good job for you?
I just think validation is so vital for every entrepreneur. Like it is so important because it almost if you've heard the statistic 90% of startups fail,
Right.
like the highest what was it? The highest reason or like the highest percentage is because of product market fit,
Uh,
which is basically like this product does not fit in the market.
hmm.
And I think validation is like, okay, here is like the problem. We're showing that it's a problem. This is how it would fit into the market. It's like solving that
Yeah.
statistic in a sense because you're figuring it out before like you actually take something to market. And like the entire goal, I think as a very beginner entrepreneur is like you want to fail fast and you want to fail cheap if you've
Yeah.
heard that before.
Right.
So like with any product I'm developing, I want to know if it's bad, like right off the bat, or else I don't
Yeah.
want to like start developing it. So I love validation in the sense like it just tells you like from the start if something will be successful.
Yeah. It's really painful when you see so because I would like all entrepreneurs to succeed, right?
Yes,
And so for
yes.
someone to put maybe years of their life into something
hmm
and then discover that there wasn't a good fit for the market is kind
Painful.
of tragic, kind of
Yes,
painful.
yes, for sure.
And so validation is all about preventing that result, right? Like that's what
Yes,
we're doing.
yes. It's super awesome.
And we all have limited time, limited resources, so we
hmm
gotta put them in the right projects. So this is a great primer for entrepreneurs wanting to validate a technology. But let's step back for a second.
hmm
Katie, how did you even learn about tech transfer?
That's a great question. Actually, my friend got an email about it and then she saw it and she was like, "Katie, like you should totally like
Uh,
apply for this." And I was like, "Oh my gosh," and it totally felt right. So I like applied and then the day after I like walked in here and I was like,
yeah.
"Hey, like I would love to work here." So yeah, I actually never heard of the tech transfer office before then, but
Hmm.
I was super new to the business school as well.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how it worked out for me just through like word of mouth.
And why did your roommate think you'd want to do something like that?
I had talked to her a lot about like starting my own business and like a lot of our conversations have been like, oh, like what if we did this? Oh my gosh, look at this pain in like the
Yeah.
society. Like let's like figure out how we would solve this. And then we were like gonna do a case competition together. So she knew it was gonna I'd be interested in it.
So when you're really, as a student, when you're very pro business, I think one thing you run into sometimes is people feel like, well, maybe you should do something more idealistic, like do a
Yeah.
nonprofit or social service.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with any of that.
Yeah, yeah.
But how would you, I, I know you're going to see this the way I would, I think, but
hmm
how would you explain to them why business is important?
I think business and making money etc. And like starting a business increases my ability to serve people.
Hmm.
and it increases the amount of outreach I can have. So
Hmm.
if I like started a business, let's say I made like a prosthetic venous valve business and I could save like millions of lives, I can reach way more people than if I decided to go like a different career route.
Yeah.
I think nonprofits are awesome, but I don't, and I would love to do a nonprofit in the future, but I think I would have to get a really good basis in business and like I would need financing for a nonprofit because it
Yeah.
is so technical and so difficult.
Right.
But I love the business school and I think it's seriously an incredible opportunity for all students.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I see any business, any startup is like a problem-solving machine. It exists to
Mm-hmm.
solve a problem. So if you can create one of those, like, so Henry Ford 100 years ago or whenever
Mm-hmm.
creates a company to solve problems, and it's still going today. It's still solving problems for people.
Yes,
It's served
yes.
hundreds of millions, whatever.
Yeah,
That's pretty amazing. That's an amazing
yes.
service.
No,
So
for sure.
that's what we're trying to do, and we hope our technologies, at BYU, the technologies are in academic journals. We don't want them to stay there. We want to
Mm-hmm.
turn them into these problem-solving machines and just
Yeah.
kind of unleash them on the world, you know.
No, I totally agree. It's seriously awesome.
But cool. Well,
But
thanks for your work here, Katie,
yeah,
and
of course.
thanks for coming on the podcast. Super fun.
Yeah,
We'll have
this was
another episode
awesome.
next week.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, take care.